Hello ladies and gentlemen, in this video I'll be talking about the hard bosses that we have in the pool of Mythic Plus in Season 3, and I'll be providing some tips and tricks that will hopefully make it easier for you to heal them. I will only focus on the bosses that are considered hard, so I'm not going to cover every single boss in this video, but now let's start with Wayrest Manor. This dungeon is considered to have some of the harder bosses, and it starts with the Heartsbane Triad. The biggest tip that I can give you for healing here is interrupt the witches which do not hold the iris. Yes, the one that's holding the iris does more damage, but it only targets the tank. The tank is usually fine, so unless they're in trouble, you can actually spare your interrupts for the side witches and reduce the amount of damage that your party members will be taking. Other than that, save your defensives and big healing cooldowns for the unstable runic mark, which is cast by the second witch. And keep in mind that the Jagged Nettle that the third witch casts, it's actually considered a bleed. So if you have Evoker or Paladin in the group or something similar, you can call them out in chat and ask them to dispel either the first, the second one, or whatever you think is going to be necessary. Onto the Soulbound Goliath. Unfortunately, most of the tips here are dependent on your teammates and not as yourself as a healer. But first, ask your range to stay in melee because it's easier to switch DPS to the Soul Thorns if they are on top of the boss when they spawn. Use all the help that you can get to heal through the Soul Thorns, and use any externals that you have proactively, especially if you don't have a Paladin to bob, a Mage to blink out of it, or of course if nobody's using the cheese with the PvP trinket, which is just dumb. The last tip is mostly for your tank, but only clear in the fire after the Soul Thorns are killed. And you as a healer should stay as far away from the boss as possible, so the little adds that spawn do not melee you and kill you right away. Obviously, any big healing CDs should be kept in for this phase. Onto the Waycrests. The tip that I can give you here is if you have ranged interrupts, you can actually interrupt Lady Waycrest during the fight, and this is going to reduce the damage that the party takes. Of course, it doesn't have to be the healer that does that. If you have Mage, Hunter, or anything else that has ranged interrupt, send as many of those as possible to Lady Waycrest, as there's basically nothing else to interrupt in here. The other big tip is if you're a caster, you can stay way in the back and you're not going to get targeted by the swirlies, which only target the closest players. If you notice in this footage, I'm standing close to interrupt, but the mage is standing far in the way back of the room and casting freely without getting targeted by any of the swirlies. If you have trouble healing or dodging the swirlies, you can do the same, and that's going to make the fight a little bit easier for you. And one more thing to mention here, this boss is actually harder than the last, and usually you have one last bloodlust left in the dungeon at this point. I would recommend sending it for this boss, because the last boss is significantly easier, as I already mentioned. On to Throne of the Tides. Lady Nazjar is the first boss, and what I can recommend here is try to stay around your tank in a circle, so the tank is the next closest target to you. That's actually quite hard to execute in a bug, but if you manage to do it, then everybody's going to get targeted by the Focus Tempest once, and the secondary jump and damage is going to go into the tank. If you execute that correctly, assuming that everybody can take the first hit from the Focus Tempest, then there's no way anyone would die in this fight because all the secondary jumps are going to go into the tank and they're safe. That gives you plenty of time to heal everybody up, and the only danger moment will become the Shock Blast, because once that is cast and it hits somebody with the orbs, you have to heal them back up to full as quickly as possible, because the next spell could be the Focus Tempest, and if they're unlucky and get targeted first, they could die. As far as the second boss goes, the only tip that I can give here is stack on top of your tank. It makes it easier to drop and group the oozes and then move together as a unit. And then any AoE abilities that you have once they become alive will help to keep them away from the group. And then we have the last boss, which could be quite hard, but the most important part here is clearing. Stack together both for the circles and the puddles at the start, and then try to stack the adds together close to the initial circles. Yes, people will take a lot of damage, but as long as you don't panic, you have plenty of time to heal after the puddles drop and before the adds spawn. And the most important part here is, no matter what's going on and how much healing you have to do, if you get the blue beam, you have to go on top of the ink and clear it. There's only two ways that you wipe on this boss. First is if people don't do mechanics, and second is if you don't clear the ink and it just spreads all over the room. So make sure you use the blue beams as effective as possible. Moving on to Garons Fall and the manifested time waste boss, there's two very important conditions that need to be true when the dispels happen. First, stay away from the person that's getting dispelled, because if you're on top of them, you can get double tapped by the beams. And then second, if you are the one getting dispelled, you also have to stand still at the moment when the dispel happens in order not to take extra damage from the circle. I actually have a separate video talking about this boss in detail, and a weak aura that highlights on your frame the person who is in the light area and it's standing still, making it much more easier to dispel. Check the description of this video where I'll put the respective links. Moving on to the Blight of Galakron, the third boss. Make sure to have instant heal for whoever gets the orb on top of them before they pass it to the tank, and try to minimize the amount of passes that you do, because every time you get the orb, it does quite a decent amount of damage initially. So the less that happens, the less you have to heal. Have big cooldowns and defensives ready for phase 2, and in phase 3 the most important thing is stay close to the bosses in melee even if you're ranged. It will make it much easier to dodge the frontals from the dragon that jumps around, as if you're stuck it will jump next to you and you just have to make a sidestep to dodge it, while you're also making the DPS and the tank's life easier because they'll be able to cleave the bosses altogether. As for the Necrofrost that roots you in place, keep in mind that you can break that with Fears, Dragon's Breath and any other kind of disorient effects, as well as Blessing of Freedom and Tiger's Lust. At the end of the Garons Fall section, I'll briefly mention the last boss. The tip that I can give you there is keep Chromie on your focus so you can easily cast spell on her on your frames, and don't forget to heal her up every time she takes damage on the big shield mechanic. Next on the menu is Tears in Murozon's Rise. The biggest tip here is how to dispel the Spark of Tear. That's always the first ability in the beginning of each phase, and you want to dispel one person as quickly as possible and then heal everybody back up to full. If at this point you get the soak mechanic, you can simply hold on the second dispel, and the person who has the debuff can either stay outside and the other 4 people can soak it, or they can just pop a defensive, or you can put external on them and they can safely be inside of the soak. Once the soak is over and you manage to top everybody up, then you can safely dispel the second spark as well. The TLDR for this boss is just don't rush the dispels if you don't have to. When it comes to the time lost battlefield, I also have a separate video talking about this boss in a little bit more detail, but the most important part here is stack towards the edge of the arena. You want to bait the frontals towards the outside of the circle so it doesn't hit the adds in the middle and the boss gets AoE stacks. Other than that, make sure to send any kind of CC and interrupts that you have for the adds, and this one should be quite easy to handle. The last boss in the dungeon, Chronolore Deus. It could actually be quite hard if you have a lot of ranged. So if that's the case, the tip that I can give you is ask everybody to stay close together, of course don't stack. And once the orbs drop, everybody walks out of the orbs always, and you're the one who walks into one of them. This makes the soaking of the orbs quite easy, and it's much more effective than trying to have priority lists, order, etc. All the chaos that comes with that could be easily avoided if the rule is everybody walks out and one person walks in. Other than that, always focus the adds and save some externals and defensives for the transition phase where you have to probably dispel 2 of the debuffs. On to Everbloom and the Ancient Protectors boss. Now the tips here are obviously don't drop the puddles on top of the bosses, keep them away from them so the melee can hit the bosses, and the biggest tip that I can give you, and I see many people doing wrong, which is actually quite hard to execute in pugs, but interrupt late. That's actually very important because even if you interrupt, the bosses keep casting, they don't get silenced. So sending in an interrupt very early is basically the same as not interrupting. And obviously quite hard in pugs, but you can try to have interrupt order and designated kicks for the important casts. Archmage Soul is another hard boss to heal, and here there's 2 important things to know. First, there's always 2 phases of fire, which are the danger ones that you have to heal through, and then there's one Chi one, which is only the ice and the arcane orbs that there's nothing to heal. So in order to distribute my cooldowns correct, I just remember fire, fire, chill, fire, fire, chill. And then the other important part is when you have the spatial orb that drags you in, know and mark the person who is baiting, and once the chaos starts, try to run towards them. For some reason that makes it much more easier to know which direction you're going to get dragged in and how to dodge the fires or the ices around you. Once you get to the last boss, the only danger part is every minute or so when the ad is being spawned. Focus and help the DPS to burn it down as quickly as possible, and once the ad is up, make sure you have everybody topped up before the colossal blow happens, because this is when it gets overlapped with the AoE ticks from the ad and everybody is going to drop extremely low. Any kind of defensives or big cooldowns should be designated for that part of the fight. That is basically the only dangerous moment, which happens, as I said, once every minute, so if you're prepared to keep everybody topped up and survive that part, the boss is quite easy. When it comes to Blackroot Cult, I think the bosses here are quite straightforward. I guess spread on the second boss so the glaive doesn't hit more than one person. And when it comes to the last boss, the very first Shadow Bolt volley is the one that you should be scared of. Save every kind of defensive CD, big AoE heal, personals, externals, because this Shadow Bolt volley you take in the face, and then after that you get a buff and you take significantly less damage from the consecutive ones. As long as you survive that part, just pay attention who's getting the swarm debuff and help to kill it as quickly as possible, and then that's it. Smooth sailing from there. We also need to mention Yasma, which is the last boss in Atal the Tsar, and the most important part here is do not drop and bait the spiders into the middle of the room. This makes the fight quite chaotic when they come alive and start chasing people, so drop them to the sides of the room, stack on the tank and behind the boss, and keep the spiders chasing you in a circle around the room, but not in the middle of it. This will make dodging them quite easy, and I have a separate video explaining how all of the strategies work, so check the description of this video if you want to find out more. So hopefully this makes healing the bosses a little bit easier and you managed to learn something new from this video. If you have any other tips, please feel free to share them in the comments below, and if there's a boss that you wanted to see but you didn't find in this video, let me know and I can try to make up some content specifically for it. Thanks for watching, good luck in your keys, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and bye bye.